now we're taking a sharp detour to my clock tower fan art of the Barrows twins. After I drew this and uploaded it on social media, I was so insanely proud of how it turned out. And then literally within the next hour, I looked at it and I'm just like, oh, this sucks. I really had a lot of high expectations for this piece, but I have to put it in D tier. I'm sorry, guys.
Hello world! Welcome back to the channel. So like you saw in my preamble, I really wasn't happy with the illustration I made last year of 𝚢𝚘𝚎 and Dan Barrows from Clock Tower, and it eventually got to a point where it bothered me so much that I wanted to redraw it mostly from scratch. I wasn't satisfied leaving this illustration in that state anymore. Like I said in my original tier ranking video, the vision was there, but I think once I made it to the rendering portion, things kind of started to go sideways. Fortunately, I still have the original Clip Studio Paint file, so I could easily pull up the initial sketch that I made and work my way up from there. And now that I've drawn and posted my anniversary commemoration art and completed this year's Clocktober challenge, I thought that fixing this piece with the hopes of bringing it to the mental image level of quality I had when I first created it would be a good way to taper off my stream of fan art I created for Clocktober's 30th anniversary before moving on to other projects. So, Clock Tower is a game that I affectionately refer to as my art block vaccine, and something about this game in particular just really fills me with motivation to draw in a way that few other franchises do. But the specific reason why it has this distinction might be different from what you expect. I was between the ages of 16 and 17 when I first discovered Clock Tower, so about 11 or 12 years ago, definitely a period of time long enough to be considered nostalgic. And during that time, my best friend and I would watch Commentary 3 walkthroughs together on YouTube on how to get all the endings in the first sphere, and I would also draw a lot of fan art that I would later upload to DeviantArt. I still have the original files of all those fan art pieces in my computer, and every now and then I contemplate deleting them because they're all just so unbelievably awful. All this artwork was made in 2014, but it might as well have been from 2008 because there was such a strong Takas LOLXD kind of vibe permeating all of them. Like, I did a bunch of mini comics that were injected with that kind of humor for some reason, and all the characters were flanderized. It was horrible. And every time I'm reminded of the fact that all of this so-called art was publicly available on the internet for a time, I take 10 damage. And no, I'm not going to show these drawings in another life cringing at old art video, or anywhere else for that matter. You're welcome. Now, granted, I still have a stupid sense of humor, as proven by these image edits I made when I was bored, and I guess all things being equal, the comics I did make back then were in a similar vein as the Clock Tower comedy hacks, or even the Snip Snip 𝚢𝚘𝚎 gag strips that Sunsoft made for the announcement of Rewind, but I basically hate everything that I made from when I was in my late teens and early 20s. And that is the reason why I have such a strong drive to make Clock Tower fan art. I'm being fueled by spite and a burning desire to get revenge on my 11th grade self by drawing something better than my old cringe. Other than the game's impact on me from a creative standpoint, I think one other reason why I'm so enthusiastic about Clock Tower is that despite me always being drawn towards dark and creepy subject matter, I'm kind of picky with horror compared to other genres. When thinking about my personal favorite media genres, 3D platformers and magical girls are the first that come to mind. I will indiscriminately eat up just about any entry belonging to those two categories, and something has to be really, really, really bad in order for me not to like it. But when it comes to horror, when I find a series I like, then it becomes extra precious to me, and I feel a stronger connection to it compared to my bread and butter genres that I can come back to over and over again. I hope that made sense. Other than Clock Tower and Yuminiki, which was the first horror game I ever played, other games that I really like or otherwise on my wish list that I want to play are 𝚊𝚒𝚒, The Witch House, Wadanohara and the Great Blue Sea, Little Goody Two Shoes, Pocket Mirror by Sweet Carol, Elisa Developer's Cut, Little Nightmares, LSD Dream Emulator, Easter Monologues, Souls of Tongno, The Seventh Guest, A Little in the Dark, Bad Day on the Midway and Freak Show, Dii no Shokutoku, and The Path. I was so torn between the last two about which one I should buy while Steam had them on sale, but I ended up buying D, so I'll check out The Path sometime in the future. I have a sort of project in mind to be able to properly play all of these games and analyze them to try and figure out any recurring elements or patterns between them that makes me interested in these types of horror games specifically compared to other ones. One obvious pattern, as you might have been able to tell, is that I tend to gravitate towards indie or otherwise more niche and obscure titles, which is an instinct I've had for a really long time that extends far beyond the realm of just video games. It's really hard for me to put into words why I'm like this without sounding like a hipster, but I think the more popular or mainstream something is, the more intimidated I am to check it out for myself if it's something I'm newly discovering. I think this mentality could be best described as me feeling like there's so many people in this fandom already that there isn't enough room for me to join in. Or if I see something popular that's in a specific genre, it makes me curious what else exists in that genre other than just the most well-known figures. This instinct I have comes up the most when I'm looking for comics or video games. And with video games specifically, this is even more true when finding obscure games, especially if those obscure games are horror. I don't know, it's like you've gone spelunking into the great unknown and ended up finding a rare artifact. But maybe that's why people are constantly telling me that I'm underrated, because I don't draw enough fan art for series that are currently trending due to how preoccupied I am with weird and obscure oddities. To make matters worse, I have a pattern of choosing some of the least popular characters as my favorites for whatever fandom I'm in, which I talked about in previous videos and how it relates to my identity in the 𝚖𝚒𝚒𝚘 and Danganronpa fandoms respectively, because in 𝚖𝚒𝚒𝚘 I'm a Mewberry apologist and my favorite Danganronpa characters are Gonta and Hifumi. Going back to Clock Tower specifically, I feel like most people's favorite characters are either the FMC for any given game or Bates from The Struggle Within, but nope. That's not how I roll. My favorite character is Edward. Bobby is an extremely close second. He's almost tied with his little brother for first place, but Edward/Dan still takes the crown for me. And this is another reason why I'm so disappointed at how the artwork I made of them last year turned out, because I did my favorite characters dirty. When going back to rework this drawing, the biggest flaws I wanted to address were the line art and the coloring. The line art was too thick and I didn't do a good job indicating the form of the characters or other materials, and choosing a cel shaded style for the coloring details made the entire piece feel way too flat and cartoony, which was the opposite of the effect I wanted. Also, the background is problematic too. I just slapped something together that I thought looked cool out of pure laziness. So for this do-over, I want to add more effort this time around and draw the caves in which the cradle under the star is located be the background. When I first drew this illustration last year, I thought about having the background be the cradle under the star, but I thought the red curtains would blend in too much with the blood on Scissorman's namesake Whippin', so instead I chose a background with cooler colors to make the red blood pop out more. Speaking of which, the blood in the original piece really bothers me. It's so bright, it's saturated, and the way it's spread across the scissors blades looks weird to me, so that's yet another gripe I had that I wanted to improve upon here. That being said, I don't want to hate on the original piece too much. I do think the vision was there. I did the best I could with the limited time I had, and was really proud of it within the first hour of me creating it. And hey, it got shared by the official Clock Tower Preservation team, so I can't be upset about that. I feel incredibly honored that my fan art was acknowledged by them. Although I do wince a little bit when I think about their call to action for artists who could contribute for the 30th anniversary celebration, and I responded to their post thinking my mediocre illustration of the twins that was my first entry in the fandom in 10 years would be enough to get me accepted. Oh, bless your heart, sweet summer child. I think I redeemed myself with my Clocktober art though. I'm kind of surprised it took me this long in the voiceover to talk about why I was so unhappy with the final result of this drawing back in 2024. But the reason for it is because I was incredibly rushed. For context, I had just finished my very first playthrough of Rewind on November 5th, and I thought since I beat the game I was safe to go on the wiki without worrying about spoilers for the first game. Long story short, I was not safe from spoilers. But when looking at Bobby's page, I realized for the first time that his and Dan's birthday was literally only 2 days away, which was troubling because I already wanted to drop fan art of the game and thought it would be wrong to miss that specific occasion. Which, by the way, I only found this out in that moment because in my playthrough I got the C ending and was locked in the shed, so I didn't get to read Walter's note. But on top of this super short amount of time I had to finish this fan art from scratch and post it online, I was also simultaneously working on a daily art challenge, so that made this already tight window even tighter. Other than looking at official art of the characters, I didn't search for any reference images for the purpose of saving time, and I tried to render the final piece all in one layer to cut out my usual stage of drawing line art separately. The problem was that I'm not used to making one layer digital art at all. This was literally my second attempt doing so, and this was a huge factor in why this piece didn't turn out the way I wanted it to, because I didn't have enough practice and confidence with this workflow to know what I had to do in order to get the results I wanted. For instance, I wanted the lighting to be more dynamic with lots of ambient effects and hue shifts, but I didn't know of an effective way to do that without affecting my line work. Although, to be fair, another reason for that was because Bobby and Dan have unnatural skin tones, and I was worried that effect would be lost if I used dramatic colored blue lighting really liberally. I also tend to sketch with a thick brush or a pencil lead, which is why my line art ended up being too thick, like I mentioned earlier. Now that I think about it, there was another time where I drew one layer of Clock Tower fan art and it didn't end up turning out the way I wanted it to. In this case, it was of Edward. The circumstances were a little different though. At the time I was coming back from an art block, so I didn't have enough spoons to draw line art from scratch and just tried to paint over my sketch. But it still suffers from the same problem as my original Barrows twin piece, where the lines are too thick. Not to mention this was my first time drawing Edward, so I hadn't figured out how I wanted to stylize him just yet. Looking at it now, this art isn't as bad as I originally thought it was, but still, there seems to be a pattern of me drawing one layer Clock Tower fan art only to be unhappy with it later on. Maybe this is the real Barrows curse. This is kind of dorky, but there's a specific way in which I stylize Bobby that I started incorporating in all of my fan art of him since my 30th anniversary piece that I went back to add in my redraw of this illustration, which is to give him a hair antenna. I know it kind of makes us look like a zombie Makoto Naegi, but I'm too committed to this design quirk now. I mentioned finding how I wanted to stylize Edward, and in every drawing I've done of him from the 30th anniversary piece onward, I also try to draw him with a matching hair antenna, and the idea is that if he and Bobby were to be standing side by side, then the silhouettes of their hair strands would suggest the blades of a pair of scissors. There's so many different ways you can draw and stylize Bobby just using his official art as reference, because his design has been revised so many times it's kind of overwhelming, to be honest. The Bobby design I resonate most strongly with is Matsuki's artwork for the PlayStation manual. Even back in 2014, that was how I was stylizing him. It just feels the most natural to me. For me, it's been kind of interesting to look back on my artwork of Bobby that I made over this past year and see myself settle into the decisions I'd make for how I would consistently draw him. For example, his eyes. Originally, I would draw his eyes as pure black with a single white catchlight because that's how he was depicted in the manual for the first sphere and in the animated intro, but later on I chose to stylize his eyes in a more detailed way based on how he was drawn on the cover of the Deluxe Plus Bonus Bible because I thought that looked more expressive and a lot creepier. I know there are some artists who draw Bobby as they would draw a normal boy child in their style, and there's nothing wrong with that, I guess, but I always rebel against that approach a little because that's how I used to draw him back in the day, and I want to distance myself from that old art as much as I can because it feels really cursed. So I make a conscious effort to depict his corpse-like features because, again, I have a little more fun drawing something different than what I'm used to by leading into the creepier parts of his design. Anyway, another area I wanted to focus on for improvement was with Bobby's uniform. I really wasn't happy with how it turned out in the original. The folds looked so unnatural to me. And at this point of the video, I really want to give a shout out to 𝚢𝚒𝚒 on Blue Sky. This account is an indispensable resource for anyone who needs drawing references for different suits, and it was an absolute lifesaver for me during all of Clocktober because man, oh man, did I have to draw a lot of sports coats. So yeah, make sure to follow them if you aren't already. You'll thank me later. I don't know how to quite put this in words, but I feel weirdly ambivalent about using reference images. Like, I never had a phase where I believed it was wrong or cheating or anything like that to use them, but whenever I'm struggling to draw something that seems simple, like clothes or a certain body part or perspective, or anything else that I feel I should be used to drawing by now, having to get reference images for that thing makes me feel like, come on, really? I do think the whole stigma surrounding reference images is a weird modern construct used to gatekeep other artists, but I have to admit that I'm only recently entering my era where I'm giving myself permission to use reference images because I can see a massive improvement in my art when I use references versus when I don't. This is one of the reasons why I like drawing in Clip Studio so much. I feel like I mentioned this in a previous video, but the built-in 3D models are so convenient for me when trying to figure out a pose or composition without having to draw thumbnails from scratch over and over, especially the perspective or angle is on the complicated side because feature creep is something I struggle with a lot when drawing. So by having those models on hand, it helps me figure out what should be on my mind in terms of creating depth. The ability to change the lighting is something I rely on a lot too for creating my own reference images. It's made experimenting with dramatic lighting a lot more fun, and I'm trying to get into a workflow where I position my models and the lighting for them just the way I want them and use them as a basis for my rough sketch. Underneath my lines, I slap down a rough idea of where I want my lights and shadows to go based on the 3D mockup on a separate layer, and then after I finish my final line art and my flats, I copy and paste my lighting and shading sketch layers on top of my base colors and directly clean them for the completed piece. I first tested out this approach for my initial Clock Tower 30th anniversary illustration, and it was so convenient and such a huge time saver. I need to make this a part of my workflow with all of my art going forward. I thought I could do the same thing with the piece I'm redrawing right now, but because the line art ended up being dramatically different from the sketch I started with, I ended up mostly doing everything from scratch anyway. I kept going back and forth over whether or not I should draw pockets on Bobby's coat here. I added them in my original version for some reason, even though I don't think he actually has pockets in his official artwork, and ultimately I chose not to bring them back in my redraw because I thought drawing them reacting to the rest of the clothing fold would be a little more difficult to manage. I also had to go back and draw Bobby's mouth, which meant I had to tweak the coloring on his face a bit, but it was worth it because he was looking really weird until I made that change. I was trying to go as long as I could without adding it because that was how I drew him in the original piece, but because the angle and position of his scissors have changed in the redraw, they wouldn't be covering up that part of his face anymore. I think I posed Bobby like this intentionally in the original version so I could avoid drawing his mouth because I didn't think I'd be able to do a good job doing so, but by the time I got into this revamp, I drawn Bobby's full face no less than 5 times, so that confidence had already been built up. Unfortunately, this won't be the last time in this drawing process that I'd have to go back and fix line art, but we'll get to that during Dan's portion of the speed paint. One funny experience I had when working on the original piece is that I had an easier time drawing Dan than I did Bobby, which took me by surprise because I thought humanoid characters would be familiar enough for me to draw that it would be the other way around. History kind of repeated itself with this redraw. Up until I finished the line art, Dan was coming up more easily, whereas with Bobby, I was struggling a bit more. But then once the coloring phase rolled around, suddenly Bobby got a lot easier and Dan became a lot more difficult. I cut a lot of this out in the final video, but there were plenty of times where I'd be working on one of the brothers, get stuck on one particular area, then jump to drawing the other brother until I hit a roadblock there, and I'd just be ping-ponging back and forth until I eventually pulled through. So back when I first got into Clock Tower, my aforementioned best friend and I were scrounging for listings for the game on eBay, and I vividly remember seeing product images for the first Fear and being absolutely terrified of Dan's artwork in the manual. So when I first created this illustration last year, I tried to draw Dan based on how I remembered my first impression of that artwork. During that process, I was worried that I went too far making him look really gross, but in this redraw, I wanted to go even more grotesque. I actually had to dial back the extremity a little bit as I kept adding on crazy details in the sketch stage to make him look all fleshy and drippy and stuff because I was getting too carried away. Even after that, I still think I went way harder on Dan's rendering than I had any right to, from coloring his eyes to underlaying a color map for his skin, the roof of his mouth, the blood smeared across his teeth, the veins just underneath the surface of his skin, and making it look all shiny with the fluid oozing off it. I was having so much fun! I had to trim a heck of a lot of footage so I could keep the speed paint at a manageable length, but I made sure that the rendering process for Dan got plenty of screen time because I had an absolute blast working on this part of the process, and I want everyone who watches this video to experience that process with me whether they want to or not. I'm just mesmerized that something like this actually came out of my own hands. There were actually a few times while drawing Dan specifically that I felt physically nauseous, although I'm not sure if this was due to how nasty I was trying to make him look, or if it was just the timing of me working on this illustration for several hours straight, approaching 5 in the morning, and badly needing a drink of water. For the sake of my self-esteem, I'm gonna go with the first one. Now, this isn't something I see as a mistake I made in the original drawing that I set out to fix in my redraw, rather a cool detail I picked up on from looking at the original art since my first attempt at creating this piece that I wanted to incorporate in my own art, which is to make Dan look more shapeless and asymmetrical. Hearing this, you might be thinking, what are you talking about? Dan's already shapeless and asymmetrical. But when looking closely at his artwork from the first Fear, you can see that his arms look totally different from each other. His left arm and hand are really puffy, while his right arm and hand are flat and limp like an overcooked lasagna noodle, to the point where his fingers are super long and thin and appear to be directly connected to his arm without any shape indicating the palm of his hand. I tried my best to indicate the different shapes for each side of his hand, starting with day 29 of 𝚤𝚤𝚒𝚘𝚎. It was a little hard because I tried to show him firmly grasping the clown doll that he was ripping the head off, but I made an effort to make his right hand look less dimensional in comparison to his left. And while for this redraw, I wasn't able to convey that same effect super well because I really wanted to emphasize how he's reaching out to grab the viewer, I still tried to make it look like gravity was pulling down on his fingers at least. I think those little details are so cool and help him look more uncanny rather than mostly drawing him as a human baby but scaled up and colored purple. Not to be outdone, Dan's Way to Capture Victory artwork puts his own spin on the asymmetricality angle, because if you look at the left side of his body, there appear to be stomps where his hand and foot are supposed to be. I assume this wasn't reflected in his in-game appearance because it would have made him harder to animate, but I think that is such a cool detail. To me, it's a visual indicator of the large frame that's being constructed in order for his true body to incubate inside it until it reaches a complete and perfect form. Like, he's not all the way there yet, but he's dangerously close to reaching that objective, you know? Later on in the process, I drew Dan's left arm so he'd be leaning against it, and it might be a little hard to tell due to the bed he's on and how this side of his body is slightly cut off the canvas, but I deliberately tried to give him a nub instead of a hand in lieu of that artwork. So the composition for the 2024 version of this piece is a little weird because my intention was to have Bobby and Dan be together symbolically instead of literally, which is why I didn't draw the bottom half of Dan's body in the original, but the way they're interacting with each other gives the impression that they actually are in the same space, because Dan is resting his hand on Bobby's scissors and some of the blood that got on the blades ended up on his hand, so the whole layout is kind of confusing. Like I touched upon near the beginning of the video, I decided to have the setting for this redraw be the cradle under the star, so I was committing to the literal interaction angle this time around, but because the way I cut off Dan's body in the first version of this piece made no sense, I had to add those extra details in addition to his bed, which for some reason I didn't get around to doing until I had mostly finished rendering him, so having to go back and re-render these parts I had newly drawn to match what I had rendered before because I didn't plan well enough ahead to render everything all at once was kind of a pain. When working on the rendering and lighting effects for this redraw, my trick for blocking in shadows using my 3D model as a guide that came in so handy for Bobby couldn't be used with Dan because he's so much lumpier and bumpier compared to the model I had. I was really struggling for a bit trying to get the lighting to look the way I wanted it to, until finally I had an epiphany. When I picked up drawing this piece back in December after taking a long break from it, I had bought the collector's edition of Clock Tower Rewind from the limited run vault a few days prior, and it arrived while I was still working on this illustration. On the one hand, I was glad to finally have my hands on all these physical goodies since I missed the pre-order window the first time and just bought the game digitally, but on the other hand, I tried to motivate myself to finish this piece by making a bet with myself to get it done before the package's ETA. I probably could have pulled it off if I wasn't out of town during the weekend it was delivered, but either way I lost the bet. Since I didn't have enough space to properly display everything that came with the collector's edition, I put the box containing all the items on my sofa and left the Dan squishy on my desk because, not gonna lie, this specific item was the main reason why I wanted to get the collector's edition in the first place. It's so cursed, it's so wrong, and I love it for that. So while taking a break from trying and failing to figure out how the light and shadows would hit Dan, I got the idea to put the squishy directly on top of a lantern, take a picture, and have that picture pulled up on my phone to use as a reference, which actually worked way better than I thought it would. Now I'm glad that it took me so long to finish this piece. I think things worked out the way they were supposed to, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to use part of my collector's edition package to help me solve this stubborn lighting problem. Even so, I feel bad that I kept putting this drawing off as often as I did. This speed paint was originally intended to go up on early November to coincide with the twins' birthday, but since this was a redraw of a piece I had a lot of high hopes for, only to miss those expectations, I felt a lot of pressure on myself to make this new version the best I knew how in order for the payoff of the comparison of my art progress this past year be even more fulfilling, which honestly made me apprehensive to work on it because I was afraid the final result of the redraw wouldn't be an improvement. But hey, the nice thing about being a Barrows Twins appreciator who constantly overestimates how much time they have to draw, such as myself, is that if you set out to draw nice art of them for a special occasion, then no matter how late you are, it'll still be fitting. You can draw them for the anniversary of the first game's release in September, but if you missed the day, no worries. Halloween is right around the corner, so there's no better time than that to draw some spooky villains. Couldn't get it done in time for Halloween? That's okay, their birthday is on November 7th. And if you still couldn't show up for their birthday, the National Twin Day is on December 18th! You've got so many options! Honestly, I feel like adjusting my expectations is a prevailing theme with my recent Clock Tower fan art. There is so much more that I wanted to do above and beyond all of the artwork that I got done already for the 30th anniversary. Like, there were some full-blown animations I had in mind, but unfortunately they didn't materialize, which I do still want to make at some point. I don't need a reason to make fan art or practice animations for one of my all-time favorite games. I could just do it without it being part of a special occasion. I guess I'm feeling this subconscious need to prove I'm a real Clock Tower fan by putting everything I have into creating art in celebration of its 30th anniversary, because anything less would be a disgrace. Kind of like a go big or go home. But honestly, I'm kind of happy things worked out this way, because I wouldn't want to throw every single idea I had for cool pieces of fan art in 1 year and then have nothing else to make from that point in time onward. So I'm happy with the amount of art I was able to make for this occasion, especially the Clocktober challenge. I know I had some difficulties and I finished it pretty late, but the point is that I completed the challenge. I drew something for all 31 days of the prop list. And speaking of Clocktober, that was definitely a tough pill to swallow for me in terms of accepting reality, because I had way bigger plans for what I wanted to do with the art I made for that challenge. I ended up going with a black and white manga style of rendering for all of my pieces, both to give me practice for my next original comic project, and also because I thought it tied in well with the theme of this challenge being an Inktober derivative. But truth be told, my original intention was to make them fully rendered colored illustrations. Yeah, like that was gonna happen, especially with how badly I fell behind just doing this black and white art. But again, I really felt like I had to go all in with my art for this franchise during this special time, and if I wasn't putting 110% of my best effort into these drawings, then I shouldn't bother drawing anything at all. On top of that, Clock Tower is such a colorful game, and I really wanted to convey that with my own artwork, so that was another reason why going the black and white route kind of stung at first. But hey, I definitely got a lot of practice doing things this way, and I learned a lot, so now I feel more confident about starting my next manga project. That being said, every once in a while I do consider going back to my Clocktober art and trying to color it with my more detailed rendering style. I still have all the original project files for all 31 pieces, so who knows. My initial idea for this art rehab extravaganza was to provide commentary about and history with the Clock Tower franchise, which made sense at the time as this is an exciting time for the game and it has a very special place in my heart. However, I only just began actively participating in the fandom earlier this year, and so far Rewind is the only game in the series that I've played, so I don't know if I have anything of value to say regarding Clock Tower specifically, and decided to keep my voiceover specific to my process recreating this drawing, but there's still some things I wanted to yap a little bit about with the game itself. Honestly, when I first started playing Rewind, I was worried that most of the positive feelings I had with the game would be mostly based on the nostalgia I had watching fan-translated walkthroughs back in high school, so it makes me really happy that I had so much fun playing it myself. That being said, I did play original mode until I got all the endings, then got all the endings in Rewind mode, then did a quick round of original mode to test something I first encountered in Rewind mode, and oh boy had I been spoiled by Rewind mode. I really missed the shorter stamina refresh time, and the ability to run up and down the stairs, and the edited animations, and Bobby's new attack patterns. But yeah, the thing I was testing, while playing Rewind mode, I noticed that during a chase sequence with Bobby, if you hide in the crate in the shed and he follows you in there, he'll immediately turn around and run away urgently without even bothering to look for where Jennifer is hiding. So what's up with that? I tested this out in playthroughs where Simon was in the shed, and a playthrough where I read Walter's note, so obviously Simon would have despawned after that, and Bobby's reaction was the same each time. And when I tested to see if he would act this way in original mode, I couldn't enter the shed after triggering Anne's pull death. Again, I don't know if this is something specific to WayForward's release of the game, or if it's been there since the first Fear's original PlayStation port and I'm just dumb, but if I remember correctly, the only time Bobby runs away following a chase with Jennifer is when the pesticide can starts spraying in the storage room and he's trying not to choke, so it seems so incredibly strange to me that he would do this in that specific location, and I need context and answers. Help a newcomer to the fandom out, true believers! Okay, moving on from this pressing issue that's been keeping me awake at night. I am dying to start playing Clock Tower 2nd, and read the novels and listen to the drama CD. Even though I had a blast reliving my high school years with Rewind, it was so much fun discovering stuff for the first time. Like, I had no idea the bird could tattle on you if you tried to hide from Bobby without killing it first. And I didn't know about Dan making the TV turn on by itself if you stayed in the den long enough. So in theory, I should have a lot of fun playing the sequel where I'm trying to go in as blind as possible. The only problem is I'll have to trial and error my way through trying to get all of the endings because I was going off memory of the playthroughs I watched when getting Rewind's 9 endings, but I guess that's part of the fun of playing a game for the first time too. And even in the first game I was running around for hours going, where in the world is the demon idol statue? I don't know how likely it is that the other Clock Tower games will come back now that Rewind has been released overseas for the first time, but I think at the very least a re-release or remaster of Clock Tower 2nd is possible. If anything, just so it can have a catchy subtitle that sets it apart from the first game. Also, please, for the love of the great father, let there be more 2D animated goodness. I want to see my favorite homicidal British orphan in Mario Cartwright style! And it would be nice if The Struggle Within got an updated, less localized translation too. My mind has been wandering thinking about what a new release of Clock Tower 2nd would look like. My dream would be that it would be a remaster, but there was an option to toggle between the new graphics and original polygonal models, like what the new Tomb Raider collections did, and if there was a museum or physical collector's edition including official translations of the drama CD and the adventure novels, that would be rad too. It would just be really weird to me if the first game got picked up for international release, but then nothing else happened with the franchise after that. Surely WayForward has other plans for this series other than Rewind, right? Imagine if there was a brand new game, or even if Clock Tower 3 had its Metroid Dread moment. That would be unbelievable. And yeah, this is probably all wishful thinking, but still, I just really want to see this series get its groove back. And now that Clock Tower is a WayForward IP, I'm just waiting for how it'll be incorporated in a future possible April Fool's Day prank thingamajig. If they're smart, they won't try to include the characters in another fake dating sim announcement. Also, open question for veteran Clock Tower fans, what would your ideal movie version of Clock Tower look like? Originally, I had a much larger section for this planned in my script where I talked about my idea of a Clock Tower movie for a bit, since that was a thing that got announced myriad moons ago and fell victim to the Clock Tower curse. But I had to severely trim it down. Even by my standards, it was too uncogent, so I thought it would be more fun to have a dialogue about the subject instead. I'll go first. I think it would be cool to see an adaptation of The First Fear, since I know the movie that was announced was supposed to be an original story that had some common threads with The Struggle Within and Clock Tower 3 in its synopsis. I know it was an intentional creative decision to not give too much development to the other Granite Girls, but at the very least, I think Lottie deserves to play a larger role in this form factor of the story, because in the game right away, we either find Laura already dead or Anne in the process of being killed. Meanwhile, as Jennifer is trying to survive, Lottie is on her own picking up important information about Mary's true nature and the switches for the clock tower. So it'd be really cool to see how the story plays out from her perspective too. I'm not picky about whether I want the movie to be live action or animated, but I do lean more in the direction of animated because it opens up the possibility of the Rewind voice cast reprising their roles, and if this were my ideal movie, it would probably be in stop motion, just because I love that medium so much. My favorite movie of all time is Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, and prior to that, the Box Trolls had that crown, and I think the designs for both the human and creature characters would look amazing in a style like either of those movies. But this all means that there would have to be actors for the male characters, which is wild to think about. Simon would definitely get a voice, Walter would probably have one for flashback scenes, and while it's unlikely that Bobby and Dan would have any lines, I guess the idea isn't entirely off the table either, and that's honestly kind of scary to think about. Speaking of which, was it jarring at all to hear the new voices in Rewind? I have no notes on the cast they got for that game. I think they all did a fantastic job, and I wish we could have had more opportunities to hear the characters talking. But I imagine for someone who played the first PlayStation game inside and out and got really used to what Jennifer sounded like there, coming to Rewind must have been a big adjustment. Like, wait a minute, you're not Rumiko Barnes! Considering the voice acting for Rewind is basically kept to the motion comics, I imagine it'd be easy enough to ignore, but I don't know, maybe I've encountered too many people whose nostalgia for an older series makes them jaded towards newer entries or re-releases. Was it also jarring to be playing Rewind mode and encountering the added features specific to the First Fear port, but still hearing the music and sound effects from the Super Famicom version? Well, we are reaching the end of this speed paint, so now it's time to look at the completed picture in all its gory glory. And when putting it side by side with the 2024 version, good lord. Yeah, this is like the Fisher-Price version of Clock Tower. I have to say, I do think the 2024 version is better than the redraw in one area, and that is the color values. When putting a grayscale filter over both of these pieces, I can definitely see more visual clarity based on the amount of contrast in the colors I chose for the first version. Whereas in the redraw, even though I definitely tried to incorporate that same contrast in values, it was extra challenging because of how much more intensely I pumped up the lighting effects. I think Bobby's pose is a little more dynamic in the 2024 version too, but the trade-off is that his body looks super wonky, and I don't think the new pose looks bad at all. They both give off their own vibes that I like for different reasons. Overall, I'm very happy with the progress I made redrawing this piece a year later. I think I finally captured the vibe I was going for in the 2024 version. I don't hate my Barrows Twins artwork an hour after finishing it anymore! Let's end things on a high note by shutting this video down. Make sure to give Boba Cat some pats, snacks, and playtime before you log out. Or to put it in words more befitting this fandom, you can't help but hit those like and subscribe buttons. And head to the description of this video to find links for every other corner of cyberspace I'm on. Thanks for letting me chat with you, and until next time, he's watching you from the cradle under the star.